All right, everybody, welcome back to Kado Games. We are here, the mics are hot, and we're going to have a ton of fun with this episode talking about, surprise, Disney Lorcana. So my guest is FerdaFanghorn, and how are you doing today?
I am doing well. How are you doing?
Man, I'm doing fine. I'm so ready to talk about budget decks. I'm ready to just talk about so many fun things. But before we get rolling on this episode, why don't you tell all the listeners who you are and what you're all about?
All right. Well, I go by the handle FerdaFangorn, but my name's DJ. My main focus with this venture is, like you brought up in the intro here, budget decks and stuff for Disney Lorcana. I've always loved TCGs. I took a break for a while. I had a couple kids. They got a little older. Lorcana happened to come out right as I was able to have some more free time. So it was a perfect storm between my Disney love and TCGs. But yeah, I'm pretty much just here to have a good time, make some content, maybe, some homebrew decks and stuff for people to run that aren't necessarily going to win you the big $10,000 tournaments, but they'll do well at a small local tournament. And that's pretty much the gist of what I try to do online.
Okay, super cool. So let's just start right off. You did a poll on Twitter, because I'm not going to call it X, and you got some interesting data points. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what the poll was, what people said, and some of the comments, because this is a fascinating discussion, not only across Lorcana, but like all trading card games ever, like budget decks. What is budget? How do you quantify that value to be a budget deck? So let's talk about the Lorcana community, what they think.
Okay. So I did run a poll. It was probably like mid-December, I think it was. And it just had three options. A basic question: what price range do you consider budget? And the first option was $50 and below, $50 and below, $100 and below, and the third one was $150 below. I got about 200 votes, and they were pretty much split between the $50 and the $100 one. There's a couple people that voted for the $150 one, which didn't surprise me. I feel like that's probably about where people in that $50 to $100 range was where I was in my brain. And as someone who wants to gear content towards budget, I wanted to get a feel for where everybody was. And it seems like they're just as undecided as me. And then in the comments, a lot of people seem to vocally be more supportive of the 50 and under. One person, for example, was like 50 is a fun budget deck. 100's kind of competitive for budget, which I think is debatable. I think if you want to be competitive, the budget's probably going to be closer to 150 because you're going to have at least one card or two that's going to be worth $20, $30.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, most of the comments are like $50, that's about it. Maybe a little bit over. If you're and I assume for some people, I don't know if they approach it as in you have 0 cards, you spend 50 to get it, or like, okay, you have maybe 30% already, you only have to buy, so I'm sure there's some of that wiggle room too, where, some people think it's closer to 100, 150 because you should already have probably half the deck anyway, if you're collecting at any kind of capacity. But so where do you stand on that? Do you think it's closer to 100?
It's a really good poll, especially since you get free data points, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
But there's two trains of thought. So like the true budget deck would be $50 or less because that's your minimum option. The other point is in trading cards specifically, $100 isn't really that bad in my opinion. Mostly because a lot of people are buying booster boxes, they're buying sealed products, or they're buying like their troves for Lorcana. So generally, the average person spends close, in my understanding, they spend close to like $75 to $100 in sealed product during like a new release. So I feel like the average $100 for a budget deck isn't unfair. But the like pure technical definition would absolutely be like the 50 or lower. There's no way you could have a functional deck less than $45, $50. There's no way unless you're playing like Pauper, like all commons, which clearly that's not what you're asking.
Yeah. Actually, fun fact on that, I did one night, I brought a deck to League and it would cost $18.50 to build. And I went 50-50. I took out a couple meta decks, got curb stomp because obviously the consistency is just not there.
Yeah.
But yeah, normally that doesn't work. But it was also super aggro. So if it's a very low to the ground fast deck, might be able to get away with that.
Right.
But yeah, no, if you're running anything, if you're going to like a set championships kind of deal where you're going to get
Oh,
like maybe 40 people, you're going to want to spend at
no.
least $75 on your deck.
Yeah, minimum.
Because that gets pretty sweaty sometimes, depending where you're at, especially where I am in Central Florida. It's brutal. Like I do pretty good, but there's a bunch of people at my local LGS last sets. 3 of the people there all went to Vegas. One guy was a top 8 finisher of the Vegas tournament, and I was like, oh, what am I supposed to do against that? I only get one night a week out with but
Well,
you're gonna
that's
want
a
to spend at least
whole
100,
nother
150.
conversation.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, if you're going into anything like that, you're gonna probably want to do closer to 100, 150.
Yeah.
Um, but like kitchen table, $50 is probably not bad.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, and I agree with your point. I think most people, like I personally, probably spend about $100 each set on initial release. So like, I don't think that's crazy to consider if you want to build a deck and go play and have fun.
Yeah. I think there's some other data points we could consider for that question. So you brought up something before we were recording that I think is valuable to talk about, and that's: are you spending like $0 to $50 with nothing in your collection, or are you spending $50 to add to your current collection? So like set 7 comes out in March of 2025.
Mm-hmm.
This episode we're recording in January. It's going to come out middle of February, so there's going to be a little bit of a time gap. But
Right.
is someone looking at your poll thinking, oh yeah, I'll spend $50 on set 7 to add to my current deck, and that's the budget? Or usually the traditional thought is your deck's value at the current state is $50 or less. So that's one plot point. And like, what do you think about that? Do you think most people are trying to look at your poll thinking, yeah, I'll pay $50 and add to what I have?
Yeah, I guess I never really came at it from that angle because in my brain, I was doing what you said, the kind of more the default, I feel like, in the community where it's my deck, if I bought them all fresh, it would be a $50 deck as
Okay.
opposed to, oh, I already have, the new set came out. I really only need 6 of the new cards and they're, maybe it's $50. Whereas I guess I could see, that's interesting. I don't know. I personally came from it as, if you went on to TCG Player and were able to get everything at market price, this is what the deck
Yeah.
costs.
Okay.
Kind of
Okay.
thing. Yeah.
I think that's the standard assumption, but I would be, remiss if I didn't say, sometimes you could look at that and think,
especially now that as Lorcana has gotten, now that we're coming in onto, we're in the middle of set 6 now, it's like it probably does come more from that angle than it did previously.
Yeah.
Too, because before it was, every new set was really substantial. You probably a third of your deck was coming from the new set, like up until probably 2 sets ago, where you were probably only maybe replacing maybe a dozen cards in your deck.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting point.
The other thing to consider, because I've heard a lot of people talk about this, Lorcana is a culmination of trading card game players, like experienced trading card game players, and then Disney fans. So that data point of what people think about the budget, especially since it's so 50-50 between $50 and $100, how many people are looking at that as a TCG player going, oh yeah, Magic decks are like $800, $100 is a budget deck. And the Disney fan who's never played a trading card game going, yeah, $50 for cardboard's a lot of money. Because both perspectives are accurate. Everyone's got a very unique way to look at it. And I just find it fascinating because Disney Lorcana is not your traditional card game. It's a lot of different demographics melded into one pot.
Yeah, and I definitely see a lot more kids playing too. Like even at like tournaments and stuff locally, I see a lot more like 10 to 12-year-olds. A couple Sundays ago, I went to a small local tournament, and I think she was 9. She might have been 8, and she was playing on her own. And that's a big punch to the crowd.
And for a kid, someone who's young, $50 is a lot. For an adult, $100 probably not as bad.
Right, especially and even if it's a careful 8-year-old, they're still an 8-year-old, and those cards are probably not going to stay mint. Yeah.
Oh no.
So there's that, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting point because it's new too. I think it also kind of skews things for the community because I haven't played a TCG since about probably 2013 until this came out. Like I took a long break from them. I was playing Magic for a while, and then once I
Hey.
decided to look, I looked into tournaments, and I was like, oh, I don't have that kind of money, so I put it down. I was like, oh, okay. Like, I'm not just getting stomped by my friends because I'm bad. They actually have like the good decks. Like,
Why not play Pauper or
yeah.
Commander?
I don't even know if Commander was really a thing then. Like I said, I was very casual at Magic though. Like I jumped into
Okay.
it
Yeah.
in like 2010, played for about 3 years, and I just basically bought like the core sets that when they came out, like the boxes, which is funny because now I look at them at the LGS and they're like a couple $100. I'm like, I paid $40 at Walmart for this like 10 years
Yeah.
ago. I should have
Yeah.
saved a couple of those. Uh,
It's funny
but
how
I
that
do
works.
think that, yeah, I do think the Disney aspect does change some of that, like you were saying, though, because I have run into a lot of people who clearly are just there to collect, like on opening day of their set. I never see them again until the next set comes out. They might play like the draft tournament that night, but other than that, like, and then there's families are doing it, like I said, and if I play with my 5-year-old, I'm even teaching her how to play because it's like it can be that simple. But I'm not giving her deck's worth like $7. Like, yeah,
Yeah, which that's fine. That's exactly what you need it
yeah,
to be.
yeah. So it is an interesting point because it doesn't have. I think it might have a little bit more of that casual collector too, where they might, like you said, they see $50 deck and go, "Well, that's that's budget," whereas we're looking at it like that's not really much because we're a lot more into the
Yeah.
playing scene.
You've played Magic. You know that 4 cards in your deck could easily be $50 by themselves
Yeah,
in your mana base. Like,
yeah.
yeah. Or if, God forbid, if you play, well, I love Yu-Gi-Oh casually, but if you play like competitive Yu-Gi-Oh,
Yeah.
one card could be $100 or more, just that single card.
Yeah, I've seen that, which is like it's weird to me because I played Yu-Gi-Oh, but like way back when it first, like I was still it was before there was any like synchro summons or XYZ, any of that. Like I
Yeah,
played
yeah.
like the OG Yu-Gi-Oh at Toys R Us playing
Oh,
tournaments.
I
Yeah, like
remember that. Yeah,
yeah,
nostalgia.
just like
Yeah,
this was before Monster Reborn and Dark Hole were like banned. Like this is how long ago I
yeah.
was playing Yu-Gi-Oh. And it's to me like I every once in a while I'm like I want to get back into it and I like I'm like I'm not
Oh
reading an
no,
essay every time I want to play a
no.
card. Like I'm
You should
but
look into Master Duel on Steam. It's free, and
okay.
they have all the
Oh,
old
I have
cards you're
that.
used to.
Yeah, I have that on
Yeah,
Xbox, I think, actually. I just play
yeah,
the
yeah.
campaign mode. Yeah.
Yeah, you can play with friends with it's like an unlimited mode. So you can play with, Pot of Greed and Monster Reborn and Dark Hole and all the forbidden and banned stuff
Nice.
just for fun. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of fun to play old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Where it's like, there's no rules, do whatever you want. And
Right.
then they blow
Yeah.
your field up with Dark
Yeah.
Hole, Monster Reborn, everything back, and you're like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Get hit with the Mirror Force, the Magic Cylinders on back to back. Like, yeah. Those it
Double
used to just
net.
be it used to just be a matter of whoever like ran out of control cards first lost. Like that's
Yeah.
usually how it went.
Yeah. Hit him with a snatch steal. This is
Like, did
mine. I'm
you
gonna attack for the
yeah.
win. Mirror Force.
The Soul
No.
Exchange flips the whole game. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
you played your trap hole a turn early. You should have waited one turn on it. And now you don't have a way to get rid of something. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was. Yeah, the cafeteria days back. Yeah,
Oh man. See, trading card games back in the day were so much fun. They're still fun, but
yeah.
oh,
Yeah, I
I
remember being
miss
stoked when I would get like a vanilla 1900 attack 4-star. I'm like,
yeah.
oh heck yeah,
Yep.
this is like OP. Yeah. Now it's like if it doesn't have 400 effects, it's no good.
That's true. However, a 1900 vanilla beater is still pretty good.
Yeah.
That's very strong.
Yes.
But oh man, love it.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's get back
Sorry.
to Lorcana. No, that's the fun of the show.
Yeah.
We get to kind of
Okay.
do whatever we want, talking about games. But let's go back to budget. So, regardless of price, let's leave that price in a little nebulous zone for now. What do you think a budget deck really is? Like, what does it consist of? What do you define as a budget deck? Because like you're a content creator, you're going to be
Mhm.
working on talking about this with people. So let's kind of set that skeletal framework so we all understand where
Yeah.
you're coming from.
For me personally, especially because I feel like Lorcana is also pretty affordable compared to other TCGs right now. Still, even like the expensive cards really aren't too crazy. But I kind of try to keep anything I would put into the deck. If it's like $10 is like my hard cap as far as like a value one single copy of a card could be, because
Yeah.
once you throw in a playset of one $10 card, that's typically almost half your budget. Even just that one copy of a $10 card or 4 copies of a $10 card. So I usually try to I find my main goal is to find like a legendary card that has a good effect It may not be meta, but it's still something you could easily build around, like Jafar, for example, from Inklands with the whole new world of ability, which he alone is only about $4 right now a copy. So you can put in a whole playset of that, no problem. You get the cheap friends on the other side draw and stuff, but that's basically what I'm kind of like looking for is usually that one kind of like decent legendary super rare that might be like $3 to $5 and build
Okay.
around that. And then maybe throw in like something like a Maui. Maybe I'll throw in two of that if I have room after I built some stuff because like it's still a great card, but it's going to be $20 just for two copies of it in your deck. So
Right.
that's my mindset when I'm approaching like as far as like okay, I'm going to build a deck, and usually it's a theme too. So like I try to like that usually helps. So it makes them look more appealing. Like if I'm like, oh, I'm going to focus on princesses and budget, and it kind of helps me narrow down the scope of what I'm putting in.
Okay. Money question. How do you feel about getting like a really good snipe off like TCG Player eBay, maybe at your locals? Someone's, I don't know, selling out and you can get a card that's normally worth $20, $30 for 7. Is that budget or is that luck? What do you think about that?
That sounds pretty lucky to me. But if you get it for 7, I mean, I guess it could fall into budget, but at that point, you're really starting to play with the definition because, like, I think at that, if you're like, oh, I only paid, 10 instead of 15 for the card, which if you can find that, that's phenomenal. I say go for it. Just grab it every time you can. Just make sure it's real. If it's too good to be
Right.
true, it's probably not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Or
I've
like
I've seen
you pulled it
offer
from a
that.
pack.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you pull it for, yeah. Yeah, like Disney Springs has been very lucky for me. I always pick up my 3-year-old, have her grab a random pack in the aisle, and I was only going to get the one pack the other day, and my daughter's like, "No, no, I want this one too." I'm like, and I almost didn't buy it, and it had an enchanted in it. And I was like, "Well, what are the chances?"
Oh.
Yeah, I was like, "Well, that's pretty exciting." I've only pulled two, and I've been playing since last February, so like that felt pretty good.
Ooh, which one? Which one did you get?
Our Legacy, RLS Legacy. It's one of the locations from Inklands.
Yes. Okay.
But it's pretty sweet looking. The first one I ever pulled was a Vanellope from Shimmering, but I did trade it because I would like needed some essential cards for like the set tournament I was about to do,
Yeah.
and I think that went towards me getting the sad beast that I finally gave in on was trading
Yeah.
that Vanellope while she was at like she was still sitting at like 130. I'm like, I know how this goes. It's not going to sit there for long, and I think she's down to like 85 right now. So
Yeah. You got value. You got your value out of that.
yeah, I was like, I get hurts because I pulled it and it's a beautiful card, but like in reality, I'm never going to use the card. Like it's not a card I would build a deck around personally. So, and at the time, Amber was a dead color to me because I didn't have Rapunzel's, but I managed to get that fixed. So,
Okay.
um,
So we've got that framework of the budget deck should be a fixed value or less. If you
yeah,
pull a card that's worth more, that doesn't count. And if you trade something
yeah,
really, really good, that doesn't count.
yeah. Like if you're building a budget deck with Amber cards and you happen to pull a Rapunzel or something, yeah, take something out and throw it in there, even as a one of. It's a good card. Like that's what I used to do. Like
Yeah.
I won my first tournament. Like it was pretty much a janky deck. I don't even know how I really pulled it off because it was I'd only been playing for a month. But yeah, like I said earlier, I don't know if this was before we started, but like I had the one single copy of Tragic Hero for like probably 4 months before I finally got my playset. And I would every steel deck I would find substitutes, but just run the one copy. So that's what I would do. Like I used to find budget decks and be like, okay, I'll squeeze in the couple of expensive cards I do own that I know are good no matter what. So yeah, like I would if you're building a budget deck and you have something pretty sitting around, you might not see it listed, but go ahead and put it in that ink color if you have it. That's what I would do.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So what are your philosophies on here is the meta deck? How do
Hmm.
you translate it to a budget deck? Because you were talking about like you've got themes, you
Yeah.
have cards where like you have Whole New World, that's not a budget
Hmm.
card, but then you have Jafar that
Uh,
has a similar effect that is a budget card. So what
yeah.
are you looking forward to translate card that's worth a lot of money to a budget card that does something similar-ish, but not,
Um,
$20?
the first thing I would look at is usually when I'm trying to replace it, I try to find something in the same like as far as like cost range as far as ink wise, like in gameplay cost.
Yeah.
So for example, like a lot of people with Beast Tragic Hero when he was a $70 non-foil card would substitute him out in their green steel decks for Donald Duck Gentleman or something like that. And he had an effect where at the beginning of your turn, each player may draw a card as opposed to Beast is just you. Granted, obviously not as good as an effect, but very similar, still draws you your card. He usually stuck around for a while because everyone likes drawing cards, so they usually let him live, and he quests for 2, so you can kind of sometimes you can sneak in some value on him because they want to keep drawing. But that's usually like I try to find something like so in Amber, where like it's obviously not as powerful as Rapunzel, but I think it's Julieta from Encanto. That's a very similar on play effect. You play her, she does some healing, you get to draw 1 card as opposed to possibly 3 with Rapunzel. And I think she comes out 1 turn earlier. So that's the kind of thing I would look for. Like an Amethyst. I'm trying to remember what the name of the card was. That I didn't have a playset of Foxes for a while when I first started playing, and so I would sneak in like the Rush Rafiki or something because it still had the Rush, maybe not as strong. It's only a 3/3, but you just try to find stuff in the similar cost range as far as like, so if it was like Magic, if it costs, 5 mana, 6 mana, maybe try something that's 4 or 5, like maybe 1 cost cheaper because it's not as good, keeps you on your curve still a little bit. But I try to find something with a very similar effect if I can and go from there.
Okay. And have you come across any staple cards that budget decks just are always going to run well, whether they're meta or not? So like the card I'm thinking about is Friends on the Other Side.
Mm-hmm.
Most everybody plays that card. It's
Yes.
not worth anything, and it's just the classic draw spell that everybody wants. And I'm sure you found all kinds of staples that budget players probably should look into if they don't know.
Yes.
Hey, get these cards.
Yeah, Friends is definitely one of those for sure because it's just a phenomenal card. And you can it's basically for free. You get to draw 2 cards, which is you can't really beat that value. Let me think. Like in Sapphire, for example, if you're building budget decks, you're definitely going to want to get a playset of Scrooge, the McDuck Manor. It's a 4-drop location. It has 9 willpower. It gets you 2 lore at the beginning of your turn. It's very pesky. It's very obnoxious to deal with. Um, I think that's one of those. If you're building a budget Sapphire deck, you're going to want that in your deck almost every single time. Let's see. In Emerald, you have the 2-drop Ursulas, which are she's come down. She's like below $1 now. I think a copy. She kind of bounces between like 80 cents to $1.50 depending on what the meta's doing. But that's one of those cards. Almost every Emerald deck, you're going to want that 2-drop Ursula because it's just got a very powerful effect. It usually hangs around for a little bit too because it's got the 3 willpower. I'm trying to think. Ruby. Let's see what and Ruby. Like Flynn's pretty cheap, but I wouldn't consider him budget. No, Flynn's not bad. I think he's only like $4. Yeah, I think he's around $4 or $5, which is about where I would cap off. And he's one of those. I think if you're running Ruby, you're probably running stuff with high strength, and that's a good card to have because for a budget because it's cheap. It'll get you a lot of lore. It will steal you games every single time. So you just I'm trying. What color did I do? I didn't run a lot of Amber for a long time, so I'm trying to think what I would put in what I used to put in my Amber decks. That was like value. I don't really think. I think the Steel, Steel, you got. I mean, things like Smash. I think is a very underrated action. It's like a 5-cent card. It deals 3 damage, but it gets rid of so many like meta characters for 3, which is a good deal. So that's one of those cards I personally like to put in my decks a lot. Steel. I mean, a lot of Steel stuff's kind of. Storm Ray John's a good one. It's similar to Friends. You get to sing it on 3. You get to damage something and draw a card. That one's usually pretty affordable. That stays pretty cheap. So I think it was a common from the first chapter. It could have been the second. But that's one. Storm Ray John's definitely because Steel. One of Steel's biggest drawbacks is it doesn't draw very well, and that card at least replaces itself and usually gets rid of a character early game and helps you establish control. So I would definitely look at like cards like Let the Storm Rage On. Baboom's a fantastic card. I don't know what Zeus is going for. I think it's spiked recently. Along Came Zeus. It's one of my personal favorites. I've been running a full playset since the card pretty much came out. Most people ran it as a tech card of 1 or 2, but I think that card's only $2 or $3. That's one if you have it or you can find it, grab it. It's always going to be good. Steel. I've ran a lot of Steel. Steel is one of my favorite colors to play.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just like I'm trying to run through the decks in my brain, but I keep everybody. And I'm like, okay, well, Robin Hood's obviously not in this category.
No.
Yeah, I'm like in my head, I'm like, oh, Little Robin Hood. I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of useless without the big Robin Hood. Big Tink has actually kind of dipped into close to that $5 line a couple times recently. She's down to like $7, which is crazy to me because I think she is debatably one of the strongest board presence for anything that's not like past 6 ink. Like she's a card you just have to deal with, and you always hate seeing it when your opponent plays it. Another budget card that people probably sleep on is Weight Set in Steel. It's an item, and Steel, like Ruby, has a lot of high strength characters. That item's dirt cheap, but it lets you have basically you can pretty much draw every single turn if you're hitting your curve with it. If you play a character with 4 strength or more, you get to draw a card. You pay 1, draw a card, and that goes off pretty well in Steel. And I've used that pretty good with like a bunch of bodyguards and and then high strength characters. Um, and then Greystone Dragon's not bad for Sapphire if you can't afford the Fishbone Quills. Sorry, I just jumped to Sapphire from Steel. My
Oh
brain.
no,
That's how my brain.
that's fine.
That's how my brain works.
Yeah,
And
go for it.
I'm just trying to. Like, it's been a while since I've messed with some of them. So the Sapphire, yeah, I would. Greystone Dragon is not a bad Fishbone replacement especially if you're running more characters. If you're on the budget side, you're probably not running the items package because that gets pricey pretty quick. But yeah, those are probably most of the ones I could think of right off the top of my head.
Anything in
I know
amber or emerald?
Emerald was
Green or
actually my
yellow?
favorite. Yeah, Emerald is my favorite ink, to be honest.
Okay.
It's my most. It's been my favorite to play since the game started. I used to pair it with Ruby, but it doesn't work. They just don't work together, and it makes me sad. But Emerald, like Gentleman
Not
Donald's
yet.
one of those. Gentleman Donald's one because Emerald's also another color. Emerald, Ruby, and Steel tend to struggle with draw for the most part. It's not everyone hates Diablo, but it's not the. I personally think everyone is overreacting about Diablo. But let's see, Emerald budget. Like the Ursulas, you definitely want the Ursulas. Curse Merfolks are usually like $1. That's a good card. That's a good staple 1-drop card for you can put into almost every Emerald deck. It fits the build. Then you have Mother Knows Best, which is a great control card in Emerald. You can bounce any character you want to any player's hand. So you can bounce something of your own to your hand, one of your opponents. That's one of those cards that sits around a quarter or so, and it's always good. You can sing it as well. Emerald Hypnotize is a good one. That's actually one of my favorite cards, and I was really happy to see it kind of creep into the meta. It gets you it makes your opponent discard and you draw, so it is still a 2-card advantage in the end, and that's a good staple for Emerald decks as well. Amber, like I think Julieta is the best example I have in Amber. Then you can things like the Gaston that you can Gaston, Doc, and Pluto are actually not bad. If you want to run any of those in an Amber deck, they have the ability to make things cheap, like characters cheaper to play, and they're pretty affordable themselves, and so they can really help you since you're running a budget deck get to your high end faster, so you don't have to play the long game as much, and hopefully you can kind of grab control when it best suits you. I personally like Doc of the 3 because it's an on-quest ability, and he's inkable, so it gives you that flexibility. He also quests for 2, so you get to get 2 points. Your next character's 1 ink cheaper, and he's inkable if you don't need him. But yeah, I think those are probably the ones in Amber that I would stick to. Bare Necessities, I don't really know if I consider it super budgety, but it's definitely a staple too for Amber. I would grab those while you can because they're only a couple bucks and it's a really strong card.
Okay.
And I
So
think that
really
about covers most of what I could pull up Dreamboard and we could do this all night, but yeah, that's just off the top of my head.
That's the fun of it. You have
Yeah.
found a niche within the game system, and that's the fun of budget decks. You're looking at all kinds of stuff people gloss over because the meta decks are here's your like 2 cards you're sliding into your deck. Everything
Right.
else is the same. And like the set of cards, there's like 100 plus 200 cards in a set, and you're only looking at 2? Oh,
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah, my main deck was what's funny is when this set first came out and I was looking at everything, there was only one single card that I even wanted to try in my new deck. And I was in my main deck because I main a Emerald Steel right now, Beast Relentless build. So it's not discard, but it's built around the Relentless Beast, which is one of my favorite cards. I think it's very underrated. It catches people off guard all the time. And last sets, people didn't see it coming. They thought they were waiting on the discard, and it never happened. And I run one single copy of Wolfsbane from I want to say it's chapter 1. It's a legendary, but it's like $1.50, $2 legendary card. But no one uses it. So no one ever expects it to hit the board. It's the only card in Emerald, or I think it's not Amethyst Ruby that has Rush. So nobody ever sees that part coming. It exerts all their damage characters, which running Steel, they probably have some. And it's just a really nifty card, and nobody's like, everyone always has to pick it up and like, what does this even do? Like what? But there's a ton of cards. There's a bunch of cards out there that I think people just don't play enough. I think people are just, like you said, too honed in on the meta. Once they see it, they don't really steer too far away from it. Um, they might tech in a card or two, but it's never anything too surprising. It's really, you kind of have to, in mid match, you kind of have to figure out like, okay, which is their tech card? Like, do they have the bells in the Ruby Amethyst or the super goofs? Like, you have to figure out which way that's going. But I love, as someone who likes to bring home brews and try to make them as good as possible. I enjoy catching, people are generally caught off guard when you're running, especially a ink pair that people expect a certain deck and it's not that deck. Like I ran into a Ruby Amethyst and like the guy, the first couple turns looked like a standard. Then all of a sudden it was like full locations. He was running like a full playset of Library and Queen's Castle. And I think he had like one RLS Legacy too. And I'm like, what is this guy? Like because I wasn't expecting that, like it just caught me, like he was able to run away. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like, so there's a lot of cards I think that people in combos and that people just don't see because they zone in. It's like, okay, well, this is what the top player won with. And it's like, well, you also have, they also know the deck. Like you can't just copy their deck and you're not going to have the same results. And I think I've seen some people get frustrated, like burn themselves out doing that as well. Like you have to learn the deck. Like it could be the best built deck, but you still have to be familiar with it, which is why I like homebrewing. Because like, okay, I know know what cards I have. Like I have hand drawn proxies that you would bring before I'd buy expensive cards. But I think that makes the most sense is just, it's you homebrew, you get to know your deck, and then you don't hone in on the meta too much, and you might find a card or two that just catches people completely off guard and it could win you some matches.
I think that's a good philosophy to have because
Yeah.
you are able to see both what's happening at the top tables with the current competitive scene, but you're also able to look at the entire set and potentially see something another person might have missed, which could be, a great tech card, a great out for a bad matchup. There's so many potential things that could happen. Obviously, meta players are generally focused on highest efficiency, highest output. But there's more than just that with a trading card game. And you'll see that happen all the time where everyone thinks some meta gets solved and then someone shows up with this weird off meta jank deck and it crushes everyone because they never thought about these combinations before.
Yeah.
And it just shows that, creative ingenuity is just as important as pilot skill.
Yes. Yeah. And then even if you're like, and then I know people, and I've been a victim of this where I build a deck and I'm really excited about it and it just doesn't do well. And you just want to take it apart. Like you don't want to figure it out or fix it. Like you're like, like in your brain, you built it, you put the deck together, like, what you want it to do and what it should be capable of. And it just doesn't happen sometimes. And it can be really disheartening. I think that's what leads a lot more people going to the net decking is they bring a homebrew. It does get crushed by one of the meta decks, but you have to play into it. Like this Relentless deck that I do run, I've been running it now since I want to say July or August. So I've got, like, I can pretty much play it without thinking for the most part. Like I no longer sit there for a minute and go, well, which one of these, characters do I want to ink this? Like, and now I know the deck. And my brother, for example, he plays Ruby Amethyst, and I don't think I've ever played anybody else who plays Ruby Amethyst so like in the flow. Like there's just watching him play it. He knows his deck. He's very comfortable with it. A very good deck. I really hate playing against it, to be honest. But he knows it inside and out. He spent the time on it, and he actually recently won. I want to say it was 92 people down in South Florida. He just won a tournament with like 92 people. I think it was, I can't remember the name of the place. I don't want to like get that wrong.
Yeah.
And yeah, so he did it with the deck. And it was funny, the weekend before we were playing each other and I dropped a big Elsa on him, like with one of my janky homebrew decks that I was messing around with. That's really annoying. And I'm like, yeah, you should run a copy. And then he put it in his deck. Like he didn't even tell me. We started a new match. Then all of a sudden I had two Elsas down. I'm like, oh, I got this. He dropped an Elsa. I'm like, when did you? He's like, I put it in the deck in between matches. I was like, no. Yeah. And so like now it's been in his deck. And he's like, I don't know why I wasn't running it sooner. And I'm like, it's especially with that new Elsa, it shifts right on it. It's finally like got it on curve. But Yeah, like I think getting to know your deck, and then you have to be willing to make the change. Like you have to lose a bunch of games to learn your deck and where it falters. And it took me a long time to get my Relentless deck to where it can go up against the meta decks, and it does really fine. It plays. I don't ever get swept. It always like even against Ruby Sapphire, which is a brutal matchup. And what cost me a play mat last sets was I got through the first 3 rounds. I was 3-0. I was feeling good, and then I hit 2 Ruby Sapphire players back to back, and I was like, of course, like the one
Yep.
deck that because they don't drop characters till they're removing your board. And once they saw what my deck did, it was nothing but ice blocks and removal, and it was just it was a very painful 2 hours just watching not being able to play any of my cards. Uh, but that was but they also got to see me finish my match on round 3, so they saw that I was running Relentless, so they kind of saw it coming by then because our match ended up running late. We were one of the last ones that round before, but the one guy had 3 ice blocks on turn 2 on board. And I was just like, there's nothing I can do. Yeah, I'm like my whole deck dies to 1 ice block. Like I can't do anything about 3 of them, and yeah, that was rough. I still have a vendetta against Ruby Sapphire, and ice block should be banned. That's just my opinion. But that's a good staple. Speaking of budget cards, if you're running Sapphire, Icebox, one of those. I hate it, but it's a good card. Yeah,
That what is
it's
it?
on my
Tap
short.
and you get -1 strength
Yeah,
or
it's free. Yeah, it's free. It's uninkable, but like it costs nothing to tap it every turn, and then you run it with Ruby, where all of a sudden your brawl is taking out everything. Because like in my deck too, like even with Steel, the way it's built is almost everything is 3 strength already, so everything already dies to Medusa except for like 2 cards. And then once Ice Block comes out, it's like they were like little Sisui, big Tinkerbell. So I'm like, what am I gonna do? It was rough. It was I just if I couldn't aggro them really fast, I was out of luck. Is what happened there. But yeah, that card's a good card. I hate it, especially with Ruby. It just makes me mad.
That's fair.
Yeah,
Let's talk a little bit
sorry.
about.
I got.
Oh no, that's fine. I
Oh
mean,
man.
it's a good transition point because that's the other thing
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up. When you're a budget player, what are your expectations going into your local events? Because you're talking about going like
Mm-hmm.
set championships, like
Mm-hmm.
actual competitive events where prize support is on the line.
Mm-hmm.
People will drive and fly into stores to try and
Yes.
get their hands on product. So if you're going in with a budget deck and they're going in with a competitive meta deck, which runs between, $200, $300, $400, do you actually legitimately expect to top out, or are you going in knowing that you're fighting uphill? It's
Mm-hmm.
possible, but like, what are your expectations going in with a
Um,
$100 or $50 less deck?
I've done that for all 3 of my sets, so I can tell you exactly. I go in. My main goal typically is I would like to get a top 8. Like that is pretty much like I'm not expecting to win the thing because it takes not only a bunch of skill, it takes a lot of luck to get to that point. And I will say it's as painful as it's been. All 3 sets that I've done, I was 1 match away from top 8 in all 3 of them, and it's starting to really kind of bother me. It's like I've actually built a meta deck recently because I'm like I am so tired of being so close with my decks, and so I'm on the fence now if I'm going to run a true meta deck. But my relentless deck that I've been running, but my main goal is top 8. Now where I'm at the set championships, the first one I ever did, I think it was like 64 people, and I have 0 competitive experience since, like I said, since Toys R Us Yu-Gi-Oh days. So I was like, oh, okay, it might be a couple out. I didn't realize it was going to be 6 rounds, an hour a
Yeah.
piece. And then and I was like sitting there, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning as I'm going into round 6, and I win. I'm in the top 8. I lose. It comes down to tiebreakers, kind of thing. And I did well, and it was aggro versus aggro matchup, so it went pretty quick. And I lost by 1 lore on the game 3, which it is what it is, and it hurt. I was like, okay, but it felt good to have build my own deck and like be like, okay, I've kind of justified it. I think you go in with a little bit lower. Ooh, excuse me. Lower expectations than if you were running the $300 meta deck, $500, whatever deck it was. I don't think if you get a top 4, I think you'd be kind of shocking. Now, my Relentless deck is not budget. It is homebrew, but it's not a budget deck. It was like a $600 deck technically on paper because I was running Diablos, Tragic Heroes, Robin Hoods, But the other 2 tournaments I did were budget style. So like I did an Emerald Ruby and Ursula's Return. It was, I mean, besides the Diablos, it was budget. It was very cheap. I pulled 3 Diablos, so I didn't really spend a bunch of money on it.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, I was very lucky with pulling the Diablos. I was very happy about that. Um, but yeah, you go when you do, even if it's a expensive homebrew, I think you have to go in with tempered expectations. If you are going to run a budget deck or a homebrew deck in that kind of setting where you know you're going to get the meta, I think what you want to do is familiarize yourself with those decks as best as you can and kind of figure out, what's your best way to either, if you're playing Ruby Sapphire, is your deck fast enough to just go really fast and like hopefully beat them to the punch? Is it Ruby Amethyst? Are you going to be able to play the control game in any way whatsoever? So you kind of have to figure out what lines to look for from them and then how you would probably best react to it. Because like I learned, because hyper aggro was a big thing when that Daisy first came out, not this set, but the set before. I mean, it was rampant. It was everywhere. And I learned with my deck that I let them kind of build the board and get to 10, 12 lore, and then I start controlling. As opposed to trying to just control from the get go, you start putting yourself behind. So you just kind of have to learn how to, like with Ruby Sapphire, I just go as fast as I can. Ruby Amethyst is really more of like just try not to leave them anything to bounce so they can't play half of their cards. Like that's like my main goal when you're running Steel against Ruby Amethyst is like try to keep the board clear because it really limits what they can do. But that's my best advice as far as like go in, maybe shoot for a top 8, but mostly you're looking to have fun. You're going to learn a lot and just learn. As long as you know your deck, you should do okay, but get to know its weaknesses because every deck has them. If you can know what your weak point is or what makes it strong, you can play into it a little better. But like we said earlier, it's really about getting to know your deck and piloting, I think makes the biggest difference. Because I've seen people build cheap decks. I've done well with some cheap decks in like smaller, like 15-person tournaments. But yeah, like you gotta know what to look out for. Like is if you have a bad matchup, how you counter it. That's pretty much, and then you just hope for the best. You just go have fun. I think if you're running a budget deck at one of those things, you're already there for the fun anyway. I don't think you're really getting sweaty over it or getting mad. Um, if you are, you should probably spend more money on a deck.
Yeah. Yeah. Salt
But
levels
yeah,
rising. Ugh.
yeah. If you're a salty person, yeah, just spend the money now and save yourself and your opponent having to like sit there and like wonder if you're going to come across the table. Like,
Okay. So let's have an honest conversation here.
mm-hmm.
People are listening. They're excited. They want to get a budget deck. Who is a budget deck really for? And this isn't necessarily like to point fingers and say, oh, you're not a competitive player, but like the reality of someone listening who's heard about Lorcana or they're interested in Lorcana and they listen to this and they're like, budget deck sounds fun.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the demographic for this kind of stuff? That way they're aware what they're getting into.
I would probably people with like less spare time on their hand, whether that be they work a lot or like me, for example, I have a 3 and a 5-year-old daughter. I'm a stay-at-home dad, so like that's my full-time gig. So like I don't really have a whole bunch of free time. Um, but I think the main demographic are people who just don't have, maybe don't have the time or resources to dedicate to some of the like some other people might have. And probably people like me who originally I got into the game to play with friends and maybe my daughters and my 5-year-old's kind of taking to it. So we'll see how that goes. But I think the budget deck audience isn't going to be, they might show up to a set championship once a year, possibly, they might pop into the LGS monthly for like the league night. Someone like that, probably not someone who's, trying to go to a couple of sets and, or planning on going to one of the big like Atlanta, Vegas tournaments. But that's probably the best graph. Probably people like I said, with parents, or maybe they work like a couple jobs. They're just busy. They don't have as much free time. So I think that's why I was drawn to wanting to do that because I feel like that's where I was for a long time. And then over time I was able to, trade and get the expensive staples. But that's who I think it's more for it's definitely for more of the casual player. Okay. Especially if you're walking that like $50, $75 line, that's going to be more like playing at home, the occasional LGS trip.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So then the next question I want to ponder with you, what do you think the budget range looks like for multiplayer decks? Something that doesn't get
Hmm.
discussed too often, but is actually my favorite form of Lorcana is
Yes,
group therapy, where
I am
all kinds of
waiting
crazy.
on official 2v2 rules because I cannot wait to play some 2v2 in this game. It's clearly going that direction with all the wording on the cards. And I will tell you, I'm sure it's been discovered now, but like we used to run some silly, like we'd run 1v1v1s. And Prince John was pretty OP even back before
Oh,
people were running like super
yeah.
bulky discard. Even just one copy of him in a multiplayer game, you're drawing like crazy. And like even if you're
Yeah.
not doing a lot of discard. So you like I think with that, I think you could go crazy low on budget if you're doing multiplayer because there are a lot of cards that get significantly stronger, like that Prince John, for example. I think Prince John would be a bigger staple than Diablo, arguably, in that kind of format in Emerald. Because I think because you could play Hypnotize in a pod and you're drawing 3 cards right there, and
Yeah.
everyone else is discarding one, you know? And so, like, while Diablo is obviously a strong card, you could easily get away with not running the $40 chicken in your deck and just throwing some Prince Johns, although he did spike a little bit. So I don't know where he's at now. But I do think it's a lot more budget friendly because there's a lot of cards that have that each opponent effect that doesn't matter in the 1v1 competitive scene at all. But all of a sudden, it's multiplying its ability, like what it does,
So are
if
there
that makes
any?
sense.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
There's a
I
ton
think
of
it
sleepers.
also you can run a lot more fun theme decks too. I think in that setting too, because you do have a little bit more of that shield of like you're not just the only target for your opponent too, so you can kind of get away with some of the more like jankier builds because you get more time to kind of develop. If you're not, if you God forbid you take the lead first, then forget about it. But that's besides that. Yeah, I think that does open a lot more doors, especially budget friendly and especially if you're playing at home. Like if you're playing with, like, you got your kids, you run a 1v1 or 2v2. You can. There's a lot more cards that are a lot stronger.
Are there any staples you can think of that people
Mhm.
might want to look into for multiplayer?
Oh, I haven't dabbled enough in multiplayer. I don't think I have a huge list. But Prince John, like I already mentioned, I have first-hand experience with how devastating that card can be in multiplayer. Very good draw engine. I don't know. I'd have to actually look at that. I'd have to look into that because I haven't built a deck with a multiplayer mindset since I think like Inklands first came out because
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for them to like give me some kind of official rules before I like go looking too much into it. But oh man, maybe I will look into some of that too. I could definitely get
Okay.
back to you on that for sure. But
Okay. Okay.
yeah, because Prince John is the only one I can think of because I ran Emerald Ruby for a long time before I switched to Emerald Steel. So like that's really the only experience I had for a while because that's what I was buying. Anytime I had some spare money to buy a meta card, that was the colors I was looking for. Um, but anything I always say anything that says along the lines of each opponent, definitely consider what that means times 3. I think look into that because that's usually what that means especially if you're playing in a pod they get significantly stronger. Like a big Tinkerbell is all of a sudden spread damaging on 3 players as opposed to just your one opponent. And
Right.
then you could play Be Prepared, but then no one's gonna like you. So there is that.
Just do it. Just do
Just
it
do it.
and
Just run
deal
one
with it later.
copy. At least be a gentleman about it, or a lady. Just run one copy of Be Prepared in the pod. All right, like
Yeah. Keep them guessing.
yeah,
It's like you've seen
yeah,
the one. Is there a second one?
yeah. That's so
Well,
funny.
let's pivot to business side of trading cards and let's talk about speculation. So
Hmm.
you are looking at all the cards in a set to see what fulfills budget friendly, what's fun,
Hmm.
what gets your deck going and builds synergy. Do you ever speculate on? So for those who may not know, speculating on anything, especially in trading cards, means you look at something. Usually the price point is low. You buy a bunch, hoping that it goes up.
Hmm.
You buy a card you see on TCG Player, everyone's selling for a nickel, 5 cents, and you know in your heart this card is going to go up to a couple dollars. So you buy 10
Yeah.
or 20, and then a DLC comes out, or Continentals, whatever. So an event comes out, and the person
Right.
who won was playing that card.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, it just shoots up to $3, $4, $5, and you're like, sell, 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 and you make a buttload of money.
Yeah.
Do you do that when you're looking through all these cards,
Um,
since you're
I
actually
do
looking
try.
at
So
that?
I do. I normally when a set first drops, I typically avoid buying singles because there's a 2 week gap between it hitting LGSs and like Target and stuff like that. And in that 2 weeks, everything is going to be significantly more money. Like if you need it right away, go ahead and grab it. But typically, I make proxies until about a month into the set. Once they're in the big stores for a couple weeks, you get a better gauge on price. But sometimes a big tournament happens and it screws everything up. So, for example, for me, was it last set? I think it was the last set with Clarabelle. I was looking at her and I'm like, as an Emerald player with a deck that, could use a little draw power, I was very excited about the prospects of Clarabelle. And I was like, $8, $9. I'm like, she's big. She doesn't really have a great shift target. I don't really see her staying there. I
Oh
bet she's going to drop.
no!
She did not. I think she has since come back down, but she jumped up to, I think it was $30 at
Yeah.
right as sets rolled around. And I was like, what am I going to do? So I had to borrow a copy from someone, and I traded an old Pokemon card for a handful of cards that included her. Um, but there are other times where I was spot on and it feels fantastic. For example, Big Sisu was crazy high when that set first came out, and I happened to pull two of her in like my first 8 packs, like just stupid luck. And so I traded one away when it was still like a $40 non-foil legendary. I was able to get a couple copies of Tamatoa. Like I need a Fishbone Quill. I got a whole playset of the Flynn Rider Frenemy because I knew that card was going to be good. That was the one card that I did go in on. I ended up with like 12 copies when it was like $1. And then when it hit 6 or 7, I was just trading it. Yeah, I was like, I'll trade you a playset right now for that $20 card that I don't have a playset. So like I knew he was going to spike because I used him in draft that night in set release, and I was like, this card is broken. Like this is a phenomenal card. Like it's just you have to kill it or what. Like so there are cards like that. But to your point, like recently there was a tournament. I can't remember which one it was now. It seems like there's so many, but there was a
There's a
deck
lot.
that heavily featured Big Duck Manor. And I always knew that card was good, and I already have a bunch of playsets. But I went out of my way to go ahead and scoop up a foil playset now because of So I went. They were only like 50 cents a piece, so I spent $2 to get a whole playset of Manor in foil.
Lord! Oh my god!
In 5 sets from now, if another vanilla location doesn't come out that's better than 9 willpower, 2 inkable, and 4 cost, that card is just going to be. I think it's one of those cards that will always kind of come in and out of meta for Sapphire, because I think even in like item decks, it's just such a pain in the butt. So one card I think that I don't really see a lot of, but I've had a lot of success with is Rapunzel's Tower. I think that's one of those. Grab it now. It's an uncommon, so it probably won't get too crazy. But I think it's one of those that could easily become one of those $1.50, $2 ones if once someone cracks the code and then I had it in my Mufasa deck that I built around Amethyst, and it just all of a sudden my Diablos that were 0-1s were 0-4s. And that's annoying. Like so everything. Daisy was a 1-7, like, and then I dropped Elsa, she's like a 2-8. Like it's a good card. I don't think people realize how good it is. I think Jafar is one of those that he was one of those. I think a lot of people still have like buyer's remorse when the Inklings first came out, because that Jafar, everybody was just like, world's on fire, the game's already broken, and that card never stuck in the meta. So,
right?
but it's one of those that, especially with the reign of Jafar coming up, he's probably going to get a better shift target. Grab it now while it's $4 a copy, because drawing cards is always going to be a staple in the game, and having an ability that gets you lore off of drawing is always going to be good. So people don't like to play because it's kind of a telegraph play. Like if you play any other Jafar, you're probably running that deck. So they just kill your Jafar, which also at the same time, if you build your deck not all in on that, that's fine because they're slowing themselves down anyway to like take care of what you're doing. So I'm kind of okay with that. But that's another one of those. I think Jafar has one of those legendaries that I think will go up because all it takes is one more good drawing card and he becomes really, really strong. I think Relentless is one of those that, like, as more and more cards come out that can like ping and do damage, he becomes better. But there's a few cards. I think Jafar has the most potential to like really vault into the meta for a while. if we can get something that's a little stickier. Like if you give us a Jafar with Ward, I think it's over.
Oh,
You know, even if it's like a one drop like 0/1 like the kit in Sapphire. Oh, that's a good budget. Actually, now that I think about that, I'm backtracked on Sapphire because I didn't really have examples. The kit Cloud Kicker line is phenomenal in Sapphire for budget. It's very fast aggro-y. So if from earlier in the episode, if you guys remember,
yeah.
that's a Sapphire one to talk about. But yeah, Jafar is one of those I see. And then there was another. The Tamatoas was one that when he spiked up to like $17, I knew he wasn't going to stay there. So I traded the one I had because I wasn't running blue at the time. And then when he came back down, I just bought a couple. But there are like on the finance side, I do look for that somewhat, but it's always a guessing game. It's like you never really
Oh, yeah.
know. There's no like a card could. There's so many times. How many times do cards get leaked and everyone's like, "Oh, this is going to be everywhere," and it's nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
Like
And that's
not
why
to
it's called
yeah
speculating. You don't
yeah
know.
yeah. I mean, I typically like I also as far as speculating, I don't typically look too hard at the prices because I know they're like fake prices for the first month of a set releasing. They're
Right.
really going to settle in somewhere. But if you could spot something, like if all of a sudden, especially if you're in a, like if you play a lot in your local scene and you know you have some good players and you see them using a card that you may not see too much talked about, maybe go ahead and take a look and grab it before it goes up. Um, but usually anything legendary that's inkable and can draw cards is probably a good one to target. I've learned the hard way with Clarabelle. Um, yeah, I'm still a little upset about it. My buddy like he bought like two play sets for when they were like $8, like pre-order basically. And
He
then I
knew.
was like, I'm like, you could at least texted me, like, could have told me. Uh,
Yeah.
he's like, I'm sorry, I should have. I'm like, yeah, you should have. Now it's gonna cost me. I could have paid one Rapunzel for a playset. Now they're $30 a piece.
Yep.
But
Well, that's another thing I want to pick your brain about. What are some card effects or stat lines that you look at? Like Clarabelle's a great example where
mhm.
card comes out, like here's a great example. Set 7 is going to launch in March, so it's about a month away from the time of this recording. So we'll be in spoiler season, we'll be looking at cards.
Mhm.
What do you look at and go, that card, if it's under, $5-10, I'm going to snatch that up because it's probably going to go up.
Usually it's more based on an effect that I think is going to be good almost always. Like if that makes sense. Like I think Inkwise Steel is probably the best example of what I'm talking about. Whereas like Steel is so great because I think the cards on their own are already such good cards that they complement everything pretty well. Like you could build a competitive deck with just about every color with Steel because of that. But I look for anything that is like if the effect is always going to be good. For example, anything that draws you cards that's pretty much without any kind of like having to meet a requirement is something I would look at. So yeah, as opposed, like there's that one. I think it's a 3-drop Clarabelle. Like you have to have less cards to draw something, as opposed to like the 3-drop Maleficent Amethyst, which just draws you a card. So each ink obviously does something different. But I usually look for anything that I think is either, especially if it quests for 2 or more. I'm always looking at that real quick. I'm always going to take a second glance at anything that quests for more than 1. I think it's a very underrated thing with something quest for 2. That's part of the reason that the other Genie became so popular this
Oh, the
meta is not only
$14
is it
draw card.
evasive, yeah, because it quests for 2. If it quested for 1, it would still be a great card. It would still be worth running 4 of in your deck for sure. But it drastically speeds up Ruby Amethyst a lot. Like it's a significant difference dropping him as a 2 quester as opposed to a 1 quester. Because then all of a sudden, Elsa's probably coming the next turn, and that's going to be 2. And then, depending on what their board is, if they hit Flynn once early, you could all of a sudden find yourself in a hole against a control deck that doesn't even want to aggro. But anything that quests for 2 is usually, I always take a second glance at that. And then usually inkable. Like if it's inkable, it's more likely to have more value because while it may not be as strong, it's more likely to be a playset card. So like I knew Big Sisu wasn't going to stay at its value because there's no way anyone's running a consistent deck with 4 Big Sisus in it. I can't envision it. I'm sure someone out there is doing it. And they're gonna find this and be like, hey, I do it.
Not you.
But
You're wrong.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, if it's uninkable, it's probably never going to be more than a 3 of typically, especially if it's a higher anything above like 3 cost. It's if it's not going to be a full playset card, I already know it's probably not going to stay. Like the Simba from this set and the Tiana have both spiked and kind of like slowly coming down because it's hard to fit in a playset of uninkables, especially now that we're 6 sets in. There's just so many good ones. Um, yeah, and then so that's my main criteria. Is usually anything that draws without any condition. If it's inkable and it quests for 2, those are the cards I first like take a hard look at and go, will this card always be good in this ink? Like Piglet's almost always good in Amber is one of like an example. Hirum's always good in Sapphire because he just does what he does. So there's always so if you find anything like if you find a decent item, like Ice Block came out and everyone was like, "Oh, this card's dumb. It's only I remember everyone was ragging on that card, and now it's a staple. Like so. You just don't really like people are like who cares about this one and then all of a sudden people were like oh this goes well with this so it's if you like especially like so each ink too like if you do a certain thing like if you are an amber player you're probably anything that has singer you're probably going to take a quick look at if you're doing sapphire anything that ramps or any items you're probably going to take a second so like for me as an emerald steel player with the relentless build I look for anything that help that my first thing is anything with damage so like Go Tamago was instantly added into my deck because that just feeds right into what I'm already doing. So I already knew that card was going to be good, and that's one of those that I did happen to grab a playset when it was a little cheaper, and it's spiked. It's only a couple dollars, but it still spiked a little bit, so that felt pretty good. Um, but it depends on what if you like to run your deck that you're running, you probably look at those colors harder than others. My main piece of advice is just anything that's going to be good and a playset is probably what you want to target. If that makes sense. So like if you
Yeah.
know so if it's something you don't see being a full playset, it's probably not gonna like have that crazy surge. Like it might still stay a little, expensive, but it's not gonna be the Rapunzels, the tragic heroes of the world.
Fascinating. All right. So, other than characters, which you have to have,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the other cards you think are good budget options for players? Because you've got, actions, songs, items, all kinds of stuff. And I'm sure if someone's listening and they might be getting their foot in the door, they
Mm-hmm.
might look at these cards and go, I don't know what I should do. Should I have a lot of items or so? Can you elaborate a little bit about the things that accessorize your deck alongside
Yeah,
characters and what you recommend or why you don't recommend them and just kind of little
sure.
primer for budget
Um,
builders?
I don't recommend locations because I don't like playing against them. So don't ever play locations; they're not good. Um, but no, it really depends. Like I said earlier, when you are building the budget deck, you're probably picking, that one $4 or $5 card and building around that. So depending on where you're going with the deck, it's going to make a difference. So like, for example, if you want to run a deck that features the aerial that has ward that gets the extra lore if you have more items, you're going to want to look at the items a little closer than you would actions or locations because they're not going to help you do what you're trying to do. Because with a budget deck, you really want to hone in and kind of build a shell around that one kind of expensive card that you're running. So that really is going to dictate where you go. Some cards, like you could build some budget decks that there's a bunch of cards that do fun things with locations. So if you're going to do, like, if you want to do something like that, say you pulled one of those Jim Hawkins or something that the legendary one, you have one copy of it, you want to build around it. If you're going to look at locations, you're not going to pay attention much. But as far as budget goes, a blanket rule is usually I like to do my deck building on Dreamborn. So like that's the website I like to use. It's a really
Okay.
easy to use. Takes a couple minutes to probably kind of get used to it, but I usually filter through the ink colors that I'm trying to build around, and then I'd like to look at the songs first because songs are just an incredible value in the game. You could play them for free by singing with your characters, which is always phenomenal. Do you put them at risk for a challenge, but it's almost always worth it to play anything for free. So usually that's my first look is what are the good songs that fall into the budget, and then after that, I usually type in the keyword draw too, and so then it'll pull up
Oh,
any
yeah.
card in those inks that says draw. You can kind of filter through them and see do any of these actually fit into what my deck's doing. Will this work? Because you're probably gonna want about I don't know. I mean, this game is so draw happy that I think you want to run at least a dozen cards like in total, not like a dozen play sets of cards because that'd be your whole deck. At least a dozen cards that draw you or replace themselves. At least I think so. You always that's the toughest thing with budget is you overcoming the draw because a lot of the good draw options are the more expensive cards because drawing is extremely powerful right now in Lorcana the way it is. Um, so like, but like there are a lot of budget friendly friends on the other side is could not be more of a staple card. It is pretty much free even still. It's from first chapter. You can get it. I think they're 10 cents a copy. You could probably get it for free from people at your local LGS if you're like new. Because my experience, the community is very friendly. Um, I've brought my bulk to every set release, and I let people pick through it almost every time because I keep an extra playset of everything for my girls, and everything after that I throw into a bag, and then I just bring it every set release for people to go through.
Yeah.
I totally lost my train of thought.
So you were talking about
Yes.
like when you build a deck, you look at so auxiliary things to
Yes.
characters. So
Yes.
songs you look for immediately.
Right.
What's next? So you've got characters, songs. What's your third
Usually
card?
song, and then probably just actions in general. Unless you already know you're running something that is playing off of items or locations, you're going to want to do actions. They're always good. They're going to have effects. Might not combo as well, but then those actions could depend also on what you're trying to do with your deck. So like if you're building a budget, like a Grandpappy is a very common, the Sapphire card that you get a lore for I think it's every damage you heal or every time you heal damage. So if you're running something like that in your budget deck, he's a very affordable super rare. I've seen people build some successful builds around him. You're going to look at actions and look for anything that heals damage because that'll play into what you're trying to do with your deck. So it does depend. Like when your initial build is going to consist most likely of 2 to 3 characters that you really want to build around, and then you just kind of go from there. So like if songs, you're going to always want to look at songs. I don't think there's ever really been a great deck without at least a song or two in it. Maybe some Mufasa decks out there, but yeah. So that's what I would look at: is anything that draws you a card, songs, and then characters, and then from there you just kind of fill in. At that point you probably are sitting at around maybe 40, 45 cards. You got to like another couple play sets you want to sneak in. You just want to look at your curve, which is how do you explain curve? It's basically how you're trying to play something each turn that's worth what turn you're on, if that makes sense. I don't really know how to explain curve.
I could do that for you. So
Okay, thank you.
playing on curve. So Lorcana, generally all trading card games follow a curve of on turn one, except for like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh. So there's a mana resource system where in Magic you have lands, in Lorcana you have ink, whatever you want to call it. So in Lorcana specifically, every turn you can take a card from your hand, play it face down into your inkwell, as long as it has a little circle on the top left, and that card becomes a resource. So on turn one, you have access to 1 ink, which means you can only play a card that's worth 1 ink, or 0 if there's a card that ever does that. And then on turn 2, you can play a card that's worth 2 or less. And on 3, you could do 3 or less, and so on and so forth. So when you're playing something on curve, you want to have a card that you can play on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4. Because if you miss a turn and you don't play anything, your opponent does play something, you are now at a disadvantage because they are on curve and you have missed your curve, and you're trying to catch up now because they're going to have access to more abilities, more bodies, more effects, and potentially win the game because you missed that drop on, turn 4. You didn't have a card that costs 4. You had a card that costs 1. It's like, oh, well.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are certain scenarios, obviously, but like in general, yeah. So like that's what I would do to finish out your deck. And so, I guess a basic rule of thumb is I usually try to do about 10 drops, about 10 to 12 drops. Then the bulk of your deck is usually, I'm a mid-range player, so the bulk of my deck is usually
Okay.
3, 4, some 5 drops, and then maybe a couple heavy hitters at the end. But it depends on what your deck wants to do, obviously. But that's generally like I think a good rule of thumb is you want to have about 10 drops. Whether depending on your deck, it might be 2 characters and items, it might be a location. It depends on what you're doing. But you want to have, I think a 1 in 6 shot of one of your cards being something you can play on turn 1 is what you want. You can run more if you're running an aggro deck. Some decks don't even run 1 drops. I've seen people they run Popsicle because it's the Ruby Sapphire people. That's who do it. But they'll drop like an Ice Block or Popsicle. It's not exactly super board control, but it is something. So you want to make sure you have enough. Like if one drops hurt late in the game, but that's
All right. Well, I have one fun question that I would love to hear your thoughts on, and then we will scoot on out of here because it is dinner time.
Yep.
Could you possibly win a game with no characters? I'm thinking about like a location and maybe item deck where you just have a bunch of walls and ways to slow your opponent, or maybe like actions where you're removing your opponent's small to mid range things, and then you're just slapping down a bunch of McDuck manners or whatever, and just passively gaining lore and making your opponent go, "What the heck? If I don't attack, I lose. If I quest, I lose. What do I?"
Yeah.
Can it be done? Is it possible?
I think it could. I don't think you're going to beat any of the top competitive meta decks that way, but I think could certainly be done. There's enough locations because the thing with locations is like, yeah, some of them are weak. So there are some decent one drop ones that have like 5 or 6 strength, get you a lore. So that's going to take your opponent at least 2 turns to get rid of, more than likely, especially early game. But I do think that's possible. There was one. See, all these tournaments are a blur now. I don't know if you saw the deck list. There was one guy, I think he was running like 22 locations, and he got like a top 16, top 8 or something like that. He got pretty far, and it was, and I don't know what the exact number is, but I think the deck was pretty budget friendly. I think it might have been I think Rapunzel might have been the only expensive card in the deck, to be honest. But was it Amber? It might have been a Ruby Sapphire. I can't remember. I know it had manners because that card is definitely one you want to be running if that's your strategy. I do think it's possible. I think if you're doing that, you're going to want to I think if you want to try to build it, what you want to do is I think you do Ruby Sapphire, but obviously instead of the typical items package, you just throw in extra locations and a bunch of control actions, a bunch of brawls, dragon fires, be prepared, anything to get rid of your opponent's characters.
Yep.
I think it could probably be done. There's enough early. Yeah, because if you drop Manor and Legacy, those are both beefy two lores. Agrabah is not a bad one. It gets you 2 lore. I think it's a 2-drop location. It could be a 3-drop. Doesn't have the most willpower, but it usually sticks around for at least a turn. And if they want to get rid of it, that's fine. Next turn you're playing a Manor anyway. So I think if you want to do it, you could probably get away with that in Ruby Sapphire. Maybe Amethyst Sapphire, but I don't think there's enough control to take care of your opponent's characters. So I think you want to pair it with a Ruby, because then if you can play a Be Prepared while you have a couple of locations out, that's pretty hard to come back from.
Value Town.
Yes, yeah. My brother, the Ruby Amethyst player, did for a while run. He was obviously running the Queen Castles and Libraries like everyone else, and his favorite thing to do was to drop 2 locations on turn 6 or like turn 8. And then turn 9, he's hit me with the Be Prepared, and then he's got 2 castles just sitting on board and I'm like, oh, okay, bummer. Right. I'm like, well, that's at least 4 lore before I can do anything.
This is a problem. How do I stop it?
So I do think it's possible. I do think if you do a Ruby Sapphire build, I'm gonna have to mess around with it on Dreamborn tonight now. See if I can't build something I think could be worth putting
I was
together.
gonna say maybe in the future we could jam some games on. Do you have webcam?
I do not. I have one in my Amazon cart because I right now have a very interesting setup. I do play with my brother sometimes on Discord, but I use like 2 accounts. I use my phone to, like on like a tripod thing over my game mat, and then I use the computer to like camera to look at me. So I'm like, it's the 2 of us. It's 4 different Discord accounts making it happen. But I am working on getting something like that. But yeah, so that's gameplay is definitely one of those things I would like to also venture into.
Okay.
Yeah, especially with the budget and theme decks, I think people want to see them in action. I think it helps like visualize it more.
Oh yeah.
So,
maybe in the future we should play, because I've threatened the devs of Lorcana and other people that at some point I'm going to go to an event and attempt to play a locations, songs, and like no character deck. And go all the way. Will it happen? I don't know. Will I try? Absolutely. Because
I think you could probably steal a match or 2. I think especially in a set or 2, I think there'll be enough, locations. Yeah. Because all you really need is a hit locations on curve. Like that's really I'm excited about this. I'm definitely going to be messing with this tonight. I'm definitely going to be building a list.
And I'm fully aware. Currently, the card pool does not support that. We have the Wrath of God. We've got some good staple locations, but we don't have like a package. We don't have an item that says,
But there's
location
not a
safe
lot of
negative
location
one.
removal either, though. So that's
Right.
helpful.
Yeah.
Zeus is probably your biggest threat besides like obviously characters like Maui just rushing in. But
Sure. But
yeah,
I'm still waiting because my gut says by the end of 2025, early 2026, we'll have enough cards, we'll have enough sets. I really think we could come up with something stupid that's like a control location deck where
yeah.
all of your character removal is worthless. If you play,
Ruby Emerald might even be worth looking at because just being
yeah,
able to
oh yeah,
bounce their stuff and then you hit
yeah,
So that could be fun.
yeah, yeah. It's not meant. It's a
Right.
non-interactive. You ever watch Pokemon trading card game?
Mhm. Yes.
Do you
Sometimes
remember
I
the
not.
old? Do you remember the old Waylord Wallstall deck?
Yes. I
Yeah,
built one like that from the original Game Boy Color game. Where it was built around Chansey and Scoop Up, and all I did was
yeah,
delay the game.
yeah, yeah. So I played that in tournaments and I loved it because everyone hated my guts because it was a
Yes.
non-interact. Like I'm playing my game and you have to figure out the answer. There is no answer. You can't beat me. But it's fun to watch people struggle because they're like, if I do this and I do this, I'll win. It's like scoop up. No. Yeah, yeah. And then I'm gonna bring the scoop up right back and
Yeah.
I'm gonna deck you
That's
out. Like
that's
it's
part of the
over.
reason I hate the Madam Mims so much for so long too, is because it's basically like a scoop up. You can swing something into it, bounce it right back to their hand, and it's like,
Yep.
well,
Mm-hmm.
that's especially my brother likes to shift his Tremaines and then bounce both of them back, and I'm just like, I don't even want to play you anymore.
Gross. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's super
So
gross.
I firmly believe that we could find a wall stall, like a
Yes.
location stall Lorcana deck. Not now, not enough cards.
No.
But set 7 and 8 could
Yeah.
bring
We'll have
out
to
the
wait and see
tools
what
we need. Yeah,
comes out of this new set for sure. Because I feel like they've been kind of quiet on locations this last set. I don't feel like anything really came out that was even worth really looking at. I can't think of anything
right.
that's really entered even like the side meta or like B tier.
Yeah. But
Because the only
let's
new one,
let's work
yeah,
on that.
yeah,
Let's
yeah.
work on a location control deck just to
I
make
will.
everyone frustrated.
Yes, I like it.
We'll do alt
As someone
pulls for
obviously as
versus
someone who
select.
likes Emerald as their favorite ink, I obviously like to annoy my opponent. So
Yeah,
I am
yeah.
all for that.
I'm pretty open to colors. Sapphire is my favorite color just because I love blue, the color in
Yeah.
general.
True.
But amber's pretty fun.
Yeah.
I think Emerald's got some really good artwork. They just got such colorful characters,
Yeah.
but they also have all the weird control, like hand disruption stuff. Like, oh,
Yeah.
hey,
Then the Emerald also tends to get like a little bit of everything too, for the most part. Like some abilities, like it has, like I said, that one beast has Rush. It's the only thing outside of the normal colors with it that has it. And
yeah,
but my biggest problem was I used to have to me and my buddy used to crack up because like the first 3 sets, everything in Emerald that was good was uninkable and extremely expensive for its stat line. And now
yeah,
it makes sense now that more of the games come out. It's like, okay, now I know why this card costs what
yeah,
it does. But like when it first came out, Emerald was just brutal because everything was so expensive and uninkable.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So this is exciting. We'll
Yeah,
keep in touch. We'll work on
for
this.
sure.
And once you get your camera gear set up, let's chat. I'll have to buy some new cards to get this funky deck running, but we can do some budget stuff. That'll be fun.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I will help you. I will help you.
Okay. Well, let's get on out of here. Why don't you tell
Okay.
all of the listeners again who you are, where they can find you? I'll plug all of your social media. Let us know who you be.
Okay. Well, you can find me on Twitter and TikTok under the same name of FerdaFanghorn. I haven't really posted a whole bunch of TikTok lately. It used to just be a bunch of stupid memes of Lorcana, but most of my content is geared towards Lorcana. On Twitter, it is all pretty much all Lorcana. I post deck lists probably every other day or so. I interact pretty heavily on there. So if you add me and interact with me, I'll interact with you. I'm just here to make some friends, do some gameplay, have fun making decks. Yeah, that's why I like TCGs. So I think
Awesome.
that sums it up.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a pleasure. I had so much
Yes.
fun talking about
Thank you for
budget
having
decks.
me.
Oh, you are so welcome.
Yes.
We're gonna do more of this over the course of
Yeah.
the year, especially when
Yes.
the new sets come out. It's like, all right, let's talk
Yes.
budget. What are you speculating on?
Right.
What are you feeling?
Yeah. No, for sure. Reach out. I am willing to come on whenever. This was very enjoyable. I was pretty nervous. I haven't done a podcast before, so that was a little nerve wracking. So I probably got a little chatty, but
That that's okay. We're audio. We want chatty. Video.
Yeah,
maybe
that's
not.
fair. Yeah, that's fair.
We've got a face that's perfect for audio. There we go.
Yes,
all right,
I did not
everybody.
make myself look good.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us here. This is Kado Games. My name is Sugi. We'll see y'all next time. And remember to play games and have fun.